Florida's controversial decision to pull an African American Studies advanced placement course from high schools has been facing ongoing backlash. Now, some taking action at a local level. The Hill notes, quote, residents are uniting in their churches, parks, and homes to learn about the history of Black Americans, including drawing on material from books that have been removed from school shelves. Florida's complicated history regarding race takes center stage in a new children's book titled Wrecker, and its award-winning author, legendary Florida journalist Carl Hiaasen, joins us now. Carl, it's great to see you. I don't think it's quite a children's book. It's more of a young adult book, right?
Yeah,
fair to say?
Yeah, middle grade. Kids are precocious these days.
So we've got a 15-year-old at the middle of this book.
Yeah.
So where does the title Wrecker come from?
Well, in Key West, which has a long tradition of outlaws and scoundrels, one of the great traditions in the old days was salvage, and the ships would come up on the reefs, and everyone would get in the boats and go out and salvage the wrecks, and they kept a percentage of the gold or the cotton or whatever it was, and those days are long gone, but the descendants of those wreckers still live in Key West, and the center of the story is a kid who has generations of that legacy, and he's got a little boat, he works in a grocery store, and all he does is spend time on the water, and he witnesses something and gets caught up in something at the beginning of the novel that it's hard for him to get out of.
And so that's during the pandemic. So you bring in that context, a place you know very well, Key West.
Yeah.
So when you sit down, Carl, for one of your best-selling books with a first blank page, where do you begin? How do these ideas percolate for you?
It's sort of because of my background. It was newspaper business for years at the Miami Herald. I sort of began with a kind of a lead paragraph. It's with the date, and on this particular date, something happened. It's just the natural flow. It's the way I always started writing, with, lay out some facts in the beginning and then let the characters sort of take over, which you can't do in a newspaper story. Well, in Florida, I guess you kind of can. But in most newspaper stories, you can't.
So talk to us about how Key West is not just the setting of this book, but is really a character.
Well, Key West is one of my favorite islands, and it's always been sort of its own distant, the Conch Republic, it calls itself, and it's one of the most, these days, one of the most liberal, liberal, but in a sense of welcoming anybody. It doesn't matter. Everybody gets along in Key West, and part of this novel is, part of it, a subplot takes place 100 years earlier with the lynching by the Ku Klux Klan of a man in Key West on Christmas Day of 1921, and it really happened. It happened to a man whose sin was living with and loving a woman of mixed race. And the Klan at that time was basically what they joked and called it the Chamber of Commerce at Key West. It ran the whole town. The sheriff, the police department, the tax collector, several judges were all members of the KKK for a very brief period in the 20s. And two of the characters have generational ties to what happened then and are affected by what happened then. And a few years after that, they were gone, never to be seen again. But at the time, they ran the whole show, and nobody you think of Key West as Margaritaville. And back then, it was a much different place.
Well, let's pan out just a little bit. The book sounds fascinating. It comes out today. You've already received some pushback in the context of Florida. Talk a little bit about the book ban in Florida and places like Texas, and how Wrecker is landing in that environment. What do you think is going on?
Well, I think the movement, and it started in Florida really under DeSantis, was mobilizing a few local people in each community to speak up at school board meetings, and basically, in the case of Indian River County, hijack a school board meeting, and with the list of books that are objectionable by their standards only, and successfully have intimidated a lot of school board members. In my case, there was a couple of events that got canceled for this book. One was in North Carolina, one was in Georgia, and one was in Virginia. And in one case, they complained because the book, one of the characters expressed a pro-vaccine opinion.
You're kidding.
For the pro-vaccine. They thought they didn't want to pollute their kids' minds with the idea that getting a vaccine might be a good idea.
And were they successful banning the book? In
no,
that district?
no, they just blocked in the event that I was supposed to.
And they canceled the event.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned the vaccine.
There's a kid in the book whose stepfather doesn't want to get the vaccine, and the kid's begging him to get the vaccine. And Key West got ravaged by COVID. And we had over 85,000 deaths in Florida from COVID. And he had seen his other friends get sick and had begged his stepdad to get the vaccine, and his dad didn't, got sick, ended up in ICU. And so as a kid, you reflect on that and you try to do your best to help your family. And that was the entire subversive message.
Was this at a library, bookstore? Who canceled the
It was at a for a series of schools. Go visit the school.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm curious at your take on this focus on libraries. And I'm willing to bet that a huge chunk of the parents that are complaining about libraries are doing nothing to get their children in libraries, that they are busy letting the screens take over and allowing them, in my opinion, way too much time on screens. There's a real disconnect here that these kids are getting stuff online that make whatever they can get in a book look like nothing. And you know, I'm constantly trying to get my grandchildren to love reading, to love the act of sitting down with a book, whether it's an electronic book or a good old paper book, to read. And so it seems so weird to me that these people have decided to focus on libraries when I think right now there's a record low number of kids under 17 actually going to libraries or using libraries.
Well, there's two points. One is that some of the books they're going after are not being taught necessarily in class. They're just available in the libraries. And I'm on a long list of much more distinguished writers, from Judy Blume to Alice Walker to Toni Morrison, for that. The second thing is many of the people that are getting up at these meetings and they're getting up as parents are possibly grandparents, but they don't necessarily even have kids in the school system. They've been mobilized online on their screens to show up. And in Florida, in one case, they brought a preacher from North Carolina in who's a right-wing conservative preacher who's on his podcast railing about this, drooling about this all the time. They brought him in to a local school board to have him read from the book. So it's theater. And it's a cynical theater at the cost of the children's freedom and liberty to read. And we've never given enough kids enough credit for what they read and how they absorb it. And we think, this DeSantis' thing about indoctrination, it's actually, in his case, projection, because that's exactly what they're trying to do.
As you say, in some cases it's working. If you're being banned, you have outsiders coming in and saying, what about the vaccine? And they cancel your event. It's crazy.
It's crazy. And this is just an adventure story in Key West, Florida, which is one of the coolest places a kid could ever grow up. I mean, it's just, it is crazy. And I feel bad for the kids.
So.